Hello everyone, legofanatikeren here with a big project that probably came the closest to breaking me of any public project I've made, certainly within the last year. It it required a bit of off the books work, and it took some alternate means to get done. I'll get more back into that later, but for now, this is a new project. I started out here with some text that I want to make, and I'm color coding this very peculiarly because I have some text in blue and I have some text in black, and the black text is going to be common text, so that's going to be text that's shared between the two different versions of the writing there, and then the blue text is going to be text that's not shared. So that's when the text diverges from the common phrasing and goes and does its own thing. And then it joins back together again for the common text and so on and so forth. So I have some text here that shares some stuff, and then at some point it doesn't share, and then it goes off and does its own thing. That's what I'm trying to symbolize here with the quick test there, just writing out every word in a circle, and then seeing how much it takes up and how much space it's going to estimate to take this. Yeah, so the idea with using with doing this God, I'm getting PTSD just thinking about this. Sorry. The idea of taking this text and splitting up and joining it back together is a feature that exists, as far as I know, only in one Gallifreyan system, and that system is called Rook. That is a script designed for linear writing, which is why you're seeing me make these long snake-like segments of text and then plopping the whole thing onto that as compact as I dare. So it's made for linear writing. It's not circular in the sense that many Gallifreyan scripts are made in closed circles, closed contours. This is not. This is not made for that at all. So I'm trying to adapt that as best I can. And the way I did that initially was by basically the same approach I have to Gallifreyan, which is also kind of circular script, but at the same time it's open contours. It's closer to being a linear script than not. So this is actually the workflow initially developed for Gallifreyan 2, which I have made a couple of videos about. But I knew from the start that this would be radically different at the same time, because Gallifreyan is like a chain of words in cases. So you have a start and a finish, and then along the path you have the letters. But it's never meant to join up with itself in the end. So it's not meant to. Gallifreyan is not meant to link back into itself, and neither is this at this scale. It does have the splitter mechanic, it does have the join mechanic, but not at this scale. So I knew from the start I was going to have some issues joining the text back together and how to position text such that it can be cut but won't ruin the stroke itself. It's a bit hard to put into words, but essentially I need to be able to cut into the word line from both directions, from both the inside and outside, and that's kind of not how it works. If you have a solid object and you have a stroke around it, then of course you have material inside you can cut. There's nothing on the outside to cut because that's the outside the object. But for this, I'm going to have to be able to cut on both sides. So I need to have divots going into the material from one side, and then a few millimeters later, I'm going to need to be able to cut into that material from the other side, from the outside that was normally thought of as the outside. is now suddenly supposed to be the inside. It's a bit weird, and ultimately I also completely failed to do it. But at the time of getting so far on this project, this is the approach that I had in mind. This is what I was going to do. I was going to make the raw text like you see right now, no cuts, just some really quick makeshift dots to remind myself what is supposed to be what. And then once I've got the text and the overall composition done, I would somehow take a copy of the center line of the whole thing, cut everything on the inside, center trace it again to get the stroke back, then reverse essentially reverse, turn it inside out, essentially, and then cut the other side, which has now become the inside. And when those actions are combined back to back, essentially in my mind, what you got was, well, you got a line which can be cut into from both sides, and it would still have mass, essentially. It sounds crazy when I say it out loud, and it turns out it was crazy. But I really thought it could be done, and I mean, I really should have tested it out beforehand, but I didn't. I went full steam ahead, did the whole main text in this style, and only then, at the end, when I was actually going to do it, it came back to bite me. And we'll get to that. That's where my sanity starts to unravel a bit. So there'll be plenty of time to get into that when it comes. But for now, this is proto text in. You would be forgiven for thinking this was Sherman, because a lot of this is the same architecture and modularity, and that's because it is a spin-off, so to speak, of Circular Sherman. Rook was developed as a linear version of that for quick handwriting, for writing in notebooks or something like that, that doesn't require you to think ahead to make all the measures and all the complicated fittings of different circular circumferences and how the divots would go together and all that stuff. This was supposed to be a simple, handwritten, quick, note-taking adaptation of Sherman. So that's why you don't see any circular vowels. You see small triangles instead, and those triangles, depending on their location and what at what point the lines exit out of, that will determine what vowel is actually there. So it's a little bit different in terms of placement of the vowels, but otherwise this is pretty much Sherman, albeit with some very cool splitting and joining mechanics, as I'm very reliant on here. And also it contains some interesting concessions for meshing different letters together. So you'll see a lot of half arcs throughout, where it's almost like two vowels or two letters sort of overlapping each other and then partially obscuring each other. That's a core feature of Rook that you are allowed to do for, again, compact writing, quick writing purposes. And I'm going to abuse that very much to sort of make everything fit onto here, because as I demonstrated with the raw lines and raw circles at the top there, this is going to be a very tall project. I did my best to snake it out, make it flow a bit from side to side, to really sort of try and compress that down a little bit, because it was going to be very high. I measured it out at one point. It was almost 3 A4 pages tall, and now I've got it down to a bit over 2. That's the very faint gray page on the back there. That's an extra A4 template thrown in for scale, but I tried my best to compress it down. And one of my big issues at this point, or not issues, but one of the difficulties I had at this stage in the design process and trying to make a good composition for this, is how I would make the two different texts merge together. Because it's one thing when you have a joined text, and then it splits off into two different routes. And there are fairly equal amounts of words on both sides. That's fair. That's what you see me do right now. One diversion to the left, one diversion to the right, and they'll join back together once they completed this little half arc of text. But when you have different amounts of text for the different versions, so maybe the left side only has 8 words and the other one has like 16, suddenly you have to accommodate one side having more text than the other. And how do you do that? You can't do that symmetrically. So you saw me on the right side there making some rough estimates of some flower-like shape with some leaves sticking out, and that's what I ended up going with to just organically come around that, artificially make more space or for the bigger word flow when needed. So that was the raw text done. That took a couple of hours, but I got it done. Now I'm doing my very best to clean up the whole structure so that I have one line going through the whole thing. This is the approach that I want. I want, the whole word line just in one piece. And now I'm doing my best to make a version of that is cuttable. So I cheated a little bit, and well, not cheated, but I did what I thought I was going to do. Take the whole thing, make a centralized trace of the bitmap copy of that, and then once I had that, it should be available to cut into on the inside bits. So that's what you're seeing me do right now, taking some of the bits and pieces back, making that into a closed contour for cutting purposes, and then deleting the extra segments afterwards. So the idea now was to essentially do what I'm doing here, taking the contour, closing it as best I could without disrupting the shape, cutting whatever can be cut on the inside, putting that back into the main assembly, rinse and repeat until I have all the inside cuts done. Then I was going to take a centerline trace of that, reset the whole thing as a stroke, and then reverse the contour so that the former outside now becomes the inside, and I can do all the outside cuts into the same piece essentially. That was the idea here, and I took the idea pretty far in that I did almost the whole thing on the inside, but it just got more and more convoluted. I don't know if you noticed, but every time I closed every time I actually close the contour, it changes the handles of the nodes slightly, so you don't get the same. Essentially, what I'm doing is every time I close the contour to cut it, I change the base shape because for some reason it changes. It's not something I do. It's something the program does. Once you add the extra nodes to it, it suddenly has to accommodate those as a spline for some ungodly reason, even though I don't think I had this set as a spline. I think I tried numerous times to turn off both the spline and the way the nodes are handled. I tried to make them sharp. I tried to do a couple of things, but whatever the case may be, it definitely changed a little bit here, a little bit there, so that once you actually took the whole thing and put it back in place as a whole, the whole thing was just wrong, and I couldn't cope with it. I couldn't. I gave up. This did not work out. So what I did was I went and installed Inkscape 1.4, which is the latest stable release. I say stable in quotation marks, but we'll get to that. Because I sat for probably a couple of days and thought about this and what I actually needed to get this working. And I found what I needed was I needed to be able to trace the bits and pieces that I needed and discard the pieces that I don't need. And that sounds suspiciously like the shape builder tool that came in 1.3. So I just decided, okay, maybe it's trying to upgrade. So I installed version 1.4 of Inkscape, got it set up, And now what I'm doing is I am taking a look through and adjusting everything so that no overlapping shapes are present where I don't need them. That means all the dots are removed from the core letters. That means that a lot of the extra arcs are traced back and placed accordingly where I actually want them. So now it's no longer a makeshift trace or a makeshift placement. Now I actually place them where I need them to be, because once I shape build this together, once I duct tape this together, I won't be able to change it. So I'm essentially making a final checks on all the placements and making sure that they're actually placed where I want them for realsies this time, because I'm not going to be able to easily edit that later. I am going to have to on a couple of occasions, but overall this is going to be final. And so my master plan here now is I'm going to take the whole thing, I'm going to turn it into paths, no strokes, because the shape builder tool obviously doesn't use strokes. And it took, I don't even know how long to convert that thing. It's edited up by 20 times, and I also cut the end because it just took too long. But it took a long time to make all that path. And once everything is paths, I, in theory, should be able to trace the bits and pieces that I want with the shape builder tool, and then it'll automatically throw away everything else. So at this stage, two important things occurred to me. One, I needed to do this in one operation, because if I stop this at any time, if I press enter and go out of this tool, everything not selected will be, boom, gone. The shape builder tool was not made for this complex operations. Let's put it that way. It crashed, frankly, as you can see here. And going back in time now to a backup and doing the whole thing again, this time I tried to separate out the elements that I actually knew I was going to need. So any part of the letters that don't actually touch the main word line don't need to be included in the shape builder operation, because they're not going to touch. The shape builder tool, the only function I use it for here is to join everything that touches together. That's the goal here. Anything that doesn't touch, I don't care about. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm actually separating out the elements that I need and anticipate I'm going to need, so that I can operate on them alone. And that's what I'm doing right now. So second try with the shape builder tool, going back and redoing all the things I did before, and maybe a bit better now than I was before. Again, turning the whole thing into paths, but only this time the things I actually need. And now going and tracing essentially the whole thing again in one operation, because that's the way the tool is intended to be used. It took not a ton of time, but any misclick, I was at the edge of my seat, because you should be able to reverse any single decision you do while in the tool. But last time it crashed, and I really don't want to do this a third time. So I was at the edge of my seat, going slowly, line by line, segment by segment, and the whole time I was just thinking about how much pre-planning you have to be able to do this in advance. Like, if I had known this was the approach I was going to take, I'm frankly not sure I would have done this. At least not in this way. This was, at this stage, my sanity was slowly coming back, but it had taken a big hit on from my intended approach to what I actually ended up having to do to actually get this just semi-working, especially because of the way you need to think ahead in terms of how the different segments should and shouldn't be joined, because you can make more than one shape out of one operation, which is what I did, but at the same time there are both pros and cons to doing that, and I needed to in the moment be able to think ahead and be like, okay, but what is supposed to be smart and what isn't, because I can't reverse that decision. Once I traced the whole thing and built it, that was it. So now I'm cleaning up some of the extra bits and pieces that were essentially made for the cutting operations. That's not something you have to do, but I chose to do it that way to give myself a little extra, I guess, security, extra peace of mind. But here we are, a couple of hours later, and frankly, a couple of weeks later in real time, having made the cuts. That was the biggest hurdle of this project, and I knew from the beginning that I would have to make some creative decisions. But in the end, the actual cuts and bits on both sides of the center stroke are done. So that's a huge relief. Now I'm noticing a couple of errors and a couple of things that can be, retroactively made to work, but just a few small errors in yellow there. Now, having done this, now I am actually separating out some of the pieces of the center word. The center trace, because some of the overlapping some of the overlapping consonants in particular need to have the illusion of a cut, even though there's not any cut in the actual trace. So, long story short, I am cutting out bits and pieces of the center line to give those cuts the aesthetic they need to be easily understood. And I noticed a couple of extra errors as well. Just marking those for now, getting back to them later. But yeah, this was that whole cutting operation was wild. It took a toll on me, and I'm not being dramatic here. It really, I think that was the most angry I've ever been about a project I've ever made. I can understand the program not doing what you want to do, but I knew from the start this would be not easy, because you can't take a stroke with no thickness, cut into it from both sides, and expect there to be no consequences. So I knew I had to make a hacky approach, but I just wish maybe for once that I'd planned ahead and actually made a demo first, if that was even going to be feasible. But yeah. Anyway, we're on the mend now. I'm fixing some small errors, using some of the very hackiest of path operations I know to essentially cut into and remove and add and join different pieces of a complex path, not a stroke, but a path. So anything is possible, anything can be edited, anything can be fixed, but it is certainly a matter of how much distortion you want to inflict on the final product. In this case, everything is already hacky as heck. So a few extra nodes or handles done in a wacky manner is not going to change anything drastically. So, main text done. It's time to do something fun, even though it's very quickly done. This is the shadow project aspect of this. I wanted to do this from the start. I wanted the text, and I wanted Ellie on the left side, and then I want something else on the right side. This is going to represent the two halves of the actual text. So whenever the text diverges into a path A and path B, shall we say, then I wanted Ellie to represent the left side of the text, and I wanted something else to represent the right side. It's going to make sense thematically later, but for now I am tracing her silhouette manually, and I'm tracing her hair with the freehand tool and the triangles, which I found I really liked doing, especially in the Alita project and some of the Tomb Raider projects that I also found this method really useful. I added a little extra bit at her chest for the flashlight, which was obscured in the actual silhouette, but I added it back in because I really think it gives a lot of extra character. Adding some extra hair here, I'm pretty happy with that whole thing. And the idea here is now to have her be at the the whole left side is going to be filled out by her, and that whole operation, even though it didn't take a lot of time, really restored my sanity back again at the same levels. It was a familiar action. It was happy. It was nice. It did what I wanted, and I really liked the way it turned out. So Lego is happy again, and now I am tackling the line work. So now we're properly writing things now. We did the proto writing with the raw shapes. We did the cutting. Now we're doing the actual line work and adding in the final actual dots to make this a real piece of text. In Rook, which shares so many similarities with Sherman that anyone who knows Sherman will have a clear idea what's going on. Now, I don't know if you caught it. Don't worry if you didn't. It'll happen again, and again, and again, and again. But this whole thing, especially with the effects later on, totally crashed Inkscape multiple times. I'll get back to that, but for now, just know at this time the Inkscape program has crashed at least twice. And the only good thing I can say about it is that the Inkscape emergency saving protocol is very, very good. Any action you take that crashes the program is still done and saved when you open it back up. It makes a emergency backup temporary file thing. You open that back up. Everything you did was there. The last action you did that crashed the program is already done here, so you never do that thing twice. So if you apply a problematic effect that crashes the whole thing, well, that effect will be applied when you open the backup up again. So you don't need to do that twice. That's really the best thing I can say about it, because it means you don't, even though you do something that crashes the program, you don't lose the progress you made that made it crash. So it never really set me back, even though it crashed, I think 12 times in total once we get to the effects. But for now, I'm doing line work, and overall I'm not thrilled at the 1.4 update, but I am pretty content. It had the tools that I needed, and I do like the new contrasts that it gave. You can see all my palettes at the bottom. They are centered and they are actually aligned rather than the slightly skewed version that I usually have. If you go back in the video, watch earlier, the 1.2.2 has the swatches a little bit offset because of the way they're set up. Now they're even. That looks pretty nice. And the high contrast buttons in blue, I really like that. And I think the best feature, I guess, is probably the fact that the actual proportions lock at the top is turned on or off depending on whether or not you did it last time. So it actually remembers if you have the proportion lock turn on or off. That's a really nice feature. But overall, I think I'm probably going to go back to 1.2.2 of Inkscape once this project is done, because I only really needed the shape builder tool for this totally crazy cutting work. It's not something I ever think I'm going to need for a regular project with actual closed contours. So this is a one-off thing. I can tell that Inkscape needs just a little bit of refinement for the 1.4.1 version. So it did what I needed to, and it saved every time it crashed. So I can't really say I lost anything, but I would not want to rely on 1.4 for any major effects work at the moment. Other than that, I don't think there's a lot to say about the process you're seeing on screen right now, other than the fact that I have a lot of empty space, and I did my best to fill that out with some long, flowy lines and some kind of ridiculously big but still very coherent dot work. I think these are probably the biggest dots I've ever made, but at the same time, the sheer scale of this means that even giant dots don't seem out of place. And as I said, I have a lot of space to fill out, so I'm just going nuts on that. There's not a lot of extra lines in this. Most of the lines you see are necessary, but there is one or two lines in there that are, strictly speaking, just decorational, but they really made sense. So I'm doing that. One interesting aspect you just saw me do there, maybe you caught it. I erased a small divot and then remade that divot on the other side, especially on the linear pieces at the start of the text before it starts snaking left to right. It's more clear to see, but a lot of the things I did here to make this more compact is I alternated the text on both the left and right, inside and out side of the actual center trace. So the word line itself has text on both sides, and it alternates whether or not the text goes on the inside or outside. And that is just something that makes it a little bit more compact. And in a weird way, it also gives it some symmetry is not the right word, but it does add some weight to both sides of the text so it doesn't look so one-sided. And at the same time, it also gives me a vague sort of pattern that I can I guess work on in a sense, especially later on when I do some more circular work. So that's why I changed that divot up there. I saw a divot that was on the wrong side, so to speak, and it also helps me a little bit with making it a little bit clearer about when a word stops. Because if everything is on the same side of the line, I would need some significant gaps between words to signify to the reader that, hey, this is a gap, this is a space. But when I alternate words on both sides in this manner, hopefully what I'm doing is I'm showing the reader that once the words go to the other side of the line, that would be a new word. So in a way, I'm also getting some sort of space characters implicit by making that alternation. But yeah, you probably see sprinkles of it all through, but sometimes I have a word on screen, like right now you have life. That is harking back to the very, very first estimate of the time and length of the project, where I just had the raw circles and I had to make some reminders throughout to remind myself, hey, this is where that word is supposed to go. This is where the words split off into this and that, and so on and so forth. I guess I should talk a little bit about the actual text itself, though. It was briefly on screen, and it's very briefly on screen every time I go down to reference it. But the text itself is how do I do this without spoilers? Some of the text is from The Last of Us Part 2 and plays a very significant part. And the other side of the text is almost the same thing at first glance, but the the meaning and the morale almost of the text is vastly different, probably even the exact opposite to what the text Ellie has to say. So in a weird way, what I'm trying to say with this piece is, even though a lot of the text is the same, when they diverge, they become complete opposites. So even though they share a lot of the same lines and phrases, the application of those phrases are complete exact opposites, and the overall meaning of these two pieces of text are fundamentally different from each other, even though they utilize some of the same the same text. And that's really what I wanted to convey with this. That's why I had the split mechanic from Rook so essential for this project, is that I wanted the same text to I wanted it to be shown as the same piece of text, except when it's not. And then when it's not, I want to highlight that very clearly. And Rook just gave me the tools to do that natively, instead of doing some hack approach with, I don't know, Sherman's or GC could actually also work kind of like this, but not nearly as efficient, and it wouldn't be right to not use Rook for this, because this is basically the best mechanic there is for this sort of stuff. Except for the fact that it's linear, but we'll get back to that. Now we're doing the effects on the main text, and if you pay attention, you could probably count the number of times my program crashed doing this, because I tried to stop the editing as soon as it crashed, but it shone through quite a bit. So anytime I make an effect here, whenever I press the button, you'll see me probably click the save icon every couple of seconds. Every action I do is immediately made after a save option. I'm walking on eggshells here. I'm so extremely conscious of the fact that any button press, any mouse click, anything I do here can set it off. And it was extremely stressful for me, which is why this is the second loss of sanity I had. It was just pure nerves working on something this big, and every couple of seconds could be the last second of the project. Again, I want to stress, I didn't lose anything. Every time it crashed, it made an emergency save into a backup file. If you open up that backup file, you're right back where you were. But at the same time, why risk it? And every time it comes on screen, you're like, oh shit. It was, I don't even know if it was the size of the project that did this, or if it just is that unstable in terms of the life path effects. But something clearly did not sit right with this, and it was not a good time. As a side note, I really hate the way the stroke handles are now for the life path effects. They used to be purple, clearly visible purple. Now everything's just white. You don't know what's a path node and what's a effect node, and you have no idea. You just have to look at the mouse and look at the instructions at the bottom. It's really annoying. They used to have some really good color codes, which is definitely one reason I'm going back to 1.2.2, because it had that really clear, easily colorable node system going on. Also, the shortcuts were simpler. Like now, Inkscape has so many tools, it has so many shortcuts. All the shortcuts are getting more complicated. But anyway, I got the effects that I needed. You can see I'm still crashing my screen regularly. I don't know if we're up to 9 or 10 crashes at this point. I lost count, but and I deleted the backup files as I went. So that was also a contributing factor. But overall, at this stage, I am very close to having finished the main text. It's got the flow that I want. It's got the size that I, could get it down to. I can't really miniaturize this much more. I've got a lot of lines connecting the whole thing together, which is something I really liked. And I got the big flowy surroundings to really sort of frame it off, so the text is not just floating in free space, it's sort of framed in by its own surroundings, if that makes sense. Now, I'm back to doing something I love, which is the framework, which means my sanity is slowly coming back to me now. But the idea here is simple. I want the Firefly logo on the right. Big surprise, I know. And I want Ellie on the left. And the idea here, as far as I go now, is how do I make these contrasts with a black silhouette and a white Firefly logo and still maintain a dark background. without obscuring the text. So that's a bit of a tall ask, but my first thought, and this is again something I had from the day one of this project, I had an idea that once I got through the difficult cutting operations and got to the coloring, I would need to do the world's hackiest mesh gradient, because I maintain you can do anything with a mesh gradient. It can get as complicated or as detailed as you need, but at the same time, it is some grueling detail work, and it's going to take hours and hours of your time. But I was prepared to do it because I thought that was the best way to do it. I want a mesh gradient where the two diverging sides of the text have their own color codes. That's the goal here. That's what I want us to do. The common text is going to be some neutral color, and then the diverging text is going into two radical different versions. So this is the third time, count with me, the third time that some big spectacular thing is going to backfire on me, and it's going to drain my my sanity, as it were. But for now, hopeful young man here makes a mesh gradient and conforms it to the mesh in question, so that I'm taking the boundaries and making them mesh up to the actual text. And for now, for placeholder colors, I'm using blue for the right side and red for the left side. So that's what you're seeing me do right now. And the trick here is, in theory, this is simple. Just make a mesh that's complicated enough to cover all of the aspects that you need, and then just color code the segments you want in the colors you want. Easy peasy. It's almost like a the grid problem, where you have a grid and a picture, and you just select all squares with, I don't know, red, or select all the squares with cars or something like that. Same principle, really. You just make the grid as you go. As you need more granularity, as you need a better resolution, more detail, more control, you just add more points and more points and more points. And in theory, you can totally enclose parts of the text in one color and then other parts in other colors, and it would totally work. You see the proof of concept here, with the starting at the bottom and then just going up as I go, filling in the extra gradient parts and refining the mesh and the handles to accommodate different segments of the actual line work and the different aspects of those that are bound together. So elements that are touching part of each other should be together color wise, while the common text should not, obviously. And also I want these two colors to mesh when they meet each other. So there's a lot going on here, but the theory here is simple, and you can see the result of my work on the right. But that's when my sanity broke again. I couldn't do it. I could continue on, but it was clearly not the best way. So I thought there had to be something better, and there was. And I'm so very glad at this point in time that I took the time back in the day to really understand clip groups, because once I went and finished my work with the mesh gradient at the time, I thought there has to be a better way. And then I thought of the result I wanted. I wanted to color in parts of this without affecting the surroundings. And when I said it, when I termed it in that way, the result was actually pretty clear to me. What I need was a clip group. So the answer was simple, and my sanity is slowly, for the third time now, coming back to me as I mark out the sections that I want in red and blue respectively. The trick here is simple. I just need these different blobs of color to essentially appear inside the text rather than on top of the text. So that's why clip groups exist. It's part of the reason why they exist. So you're seeing me do some clip work group now with some demo pieces, and then in a moment I'm going to take the whole thing now that I've confirmed that it works the way I intend. So it's just a bit of fiddling about with the various objects and the hierarchy that they need to go to. Nothing fancy to it. You can find plenty of clip group tutorials online. And now I'm just blurring them together to give it that gradient look that I had going for me when I did the mesh gradient. There's a bit of tomfoolery going on here with the way the actual paths are rendered, but eventually I managed to twist it into doing what I wanted it to do. Again, this is a very hacky approach for something that really shouldn't be that complex, but I made it work, made it all blurry, and then I applied the color code as I needed. The end result is really good, though, I have to say. So it really did what I wanted to do, and it fit what I needed it to do. So here we have the final colors applied. Now it's just a matter of tuning the actual output so it can be readable. So here's what I'm doing. I'm doing red for Ellie, doing a very subtle red background there to make her silhouette stand out. And then I'm doing a white fade in of the Firefly logo to sort of give it that opposite color look. So the white text goes towards the Firefly, the red text goes towards Ellie. This is two different, very different takes on the same core text here. But I really like it. This is what it was made to do. This is what I envisioned doing. So done. Now the last thing I did was add the rest of the text. So the whole gimmick of the first enormous pile of text there on the right is that it diverges. You have the text, and then depending on how you read that text, it can go in one of two different directions. That was done and over with. Now I don't have any more accompanying text that can diverge. Now we just have the rest of Ellie's monologue, shall we say. And for this, I really wanted to try and see what would happen if you actually treated Rook Gallifreyan as a Sherman architecture, basically. So what I'm doing is I am still obeying the rules of Rook as far as I can tell. I'm still obeying all the modular rules. I'm still obeying the letters and mostly the reading direction, but I'm treating the architecture as though it was actual Shermans. So I'm laying it out in a very much more familiar circular manner, classic unfurled Sherman, if you will, and I'm going to see how far that goes. If this goes well, if this turns out to be very readable, and if there's no kinks on this, this would probably be my preferred workflow for Rook going forward if I need it again for another project, because this is frankly way more easy to deal with. You don't know it because of the way time is sped up here, but this whole segment of sort of circular text, that text is about 1/3 of the split text on the right, but it was done in, I think, 1/4 of the time. So the amount of stuff I got done relative to the size of the text was so much more efficient in this style than the other one, because I didn't have all those long, flowy, linear lines like I have in Gallifreyan to deal with. I had something much more closely aligned with closed contour geometry in circular fashion. Very easy, very fast to cut out. I don't have text on both sides of the lines. That's also a big help. And everything just went so much faster here. So there definitely some what's the word? incentives to stylize Rook Gallifreyan in this manner if I needed to do it again. But having done that, we now turn our attention to the actual cutting. That was the proto-text you saw first. Now we're cutting it, and now we're doing the actual line work and some of the punctuation, which I did get wrong in this video. I went back after I was done and added the extra dots that I needed, because even though this is 95% German modularity, the punctuation especially has a little bit of a quirk. So I got lazy, or I just fell back on, patterns and the stuff that I know by heart, and didn't remember to think that I needed an extra dot for the punctuation there to get it right. But overall, punctuation is pretty much done now. Now it is time to do the finalization. So I'm doing the finalization of everything now. I have cut the writing. Now I need to add the lines. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to finalize the whole thing. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to finalize the actual framing, add some backgrounds, tweak some of the colors a little bit, and sit back and be happy, because now we're back in familiar territory. There's no more hurdles to overcome. There's no more unknown experimental settings or workflows. We're back in good old, well-known territory. So legofanatikeren is once again happy and slowly coming down from all the panic attacks and all of the really hacky approaches I had to do to get this working. That was certainly something. It's been a roller coaster of a project, and if I didn't have my other projects in between to sort of give me other outlets, I would I don't know what I would do. But either way, we are finalizing the text now. As I said, at this stage I made a little blue note on the left side of her face to remind myself that I have a little radical idea here once I finish up the line work, which I'm going to come back to. But for now, there's nothing really interesting at stake here. I guess the only thing to sort of note here is that because this is less centered and there's no common centerline trace between all this like there was for the more traditional Rook style of writing that I made on the right, the reading order here is a little bit hacked as well. I keep using the word hack, but this project is at times really duct taped together. And the reading order is an example of this. Because Rook is made as a linear system, there is no question of what is the reading direction. It should just be start here, follow this central line, and then just go word by word by word. But now, because I'm trying to experiment with the Sherman architecture, I'm suddenly dealing with, words that are flowing around on their own, disconnected from the rest. And this is why I've tried my best to rationalize my approach here and really think about how my composition is going to affect the reading. So the idea is you start from the split text on the right, and then you read upside down basically. But you treat each individual word as its own thing starting from 6 o'clock, which is a bit I'm not going to say it's hypocritical, because I'm being consistent with this, but it is a bit like trying to have your cake and eat it too. So I just hope it'll be readable, and I hope it'll make sense. Now, I did at the last minute there try and add a tear track. I thought maybe that would add something to the dynamic, add something to the silhouette itself, but no, it didn't really look right. And instead I kept the iconic silhouette clean and sharp. Now at the last minute here, I added some distress to the background to break that up a bit, and I added some distress to the Firefly logo, because that frankly really needed it. You can't have a Firefly logo not being distressed. That's just I don't make the rules. That's just how it is. But once I'm done with that, I'm pretty much done. So it's a bit weird looking at it from this angle because you can see all the surroundings and you can see all the stress that cuts out, and you can see the page line, the edge of the page sticking up in the center of it. So it doesn't give the best picture here, but it's done now, and I'm really happy with it. And I spent, I think, 17 hours on this. So proportionally to the amount of text that I wrote, that's a horrendous metric, because there was not a lot of text. There was like 9 lines or something. It should not take that long to write 9 lines. 17 hours is horrendous for that. But in my defense, it a lot of the time was spent on making some hacky workarounds for the workflow, which I'm still not really sure if I were to do this again, if I would have done anything different, because the idea was, at least in my head, sound, but the actual application and execution was horrendous. So, not regretting my initial planning, but I am regretting a little bit. At least 3 times in this project, I regretted a little bit starting this whole thing, because I it was there was some obstacles I wasn't prepared to face. But having a think about it, going back to the project later and thinking about what I actually wanted the end result to be instead of how I was going to do it, made me realize a couple of other options existed. So thanks Inkscape 1.4 for the shape builder tool, but I'm going back to 1.2.2, which is really stable and it has everything I need apart from that. Thank you for watching this project, and thank you for sticking with me for this insane thing. I'll see you maybe in a couple of weeks with a small project. I need a break. Bye.